The province announced this week that as of March 1st, vaccine passports would no longer be required. As well, effective today, many capacity limits were lifted. While this may be great news to some, it struck fear in the hearts of others. For one, our Ontario Hub's editor, Sarah Trick, who joins us now from the nation's capital. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Jan.
All right, so for your op-ed for TVO.org, you wrote that you're more scared now than you have been at any time since the pandemic started. I'm hoping you can unpack that for us a little bit. What is your main concern?
Okay, so I was being um, perhaps a little bit hyperbolic to make a point. Um, I do stand by my statement. I do want to make clear that the reason that I am scared right now for myself is not necessarily the virus. Um, I've had all three of my shots. There's no reason for me to believe that the vaccine did not work in my case. Even though I'm high risk, I have every expectation of coming through COVID-19 okay. What frightens me is a society that seems to have rendered disabled people and immunocompromised people and children acceptable losses for getting back to normal. And what frightens me is that many people will not be included in this normal. And people that I would have thought were compassionate and caring seem to find this okay. That's what scares me.
I think a lot of this has to do with sort of this narrative in this potentially last wave that Omicron is mild. And in your op-ed, you had mentioned that that narrative is problematic. Can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so first of all, we are lucky in that Omicron does appear to be milder than Delta so far. Um, However, the sheer infectivity of this variant means that there is, as everybody has seen, a higher absolute number of cases, but also a higher absolute number of deaths. During the peak of the Omicron wave, Canada reported approximately 170 deaths per week. During the peak of the Delta wave, which is the more deadly variant, the peak was 50. So even though Omicron does seem to be milder as a proportion of like the amount of cases infected, um, the number of deaths is the same or higher. Um, as well, the infectivity of it means that a lot of the precautions that we took aren't necessarily working as well. Um, it is more common to be infected now. Vaccine effectiveness has declined, although not, it hasn't gone away entirely, which is really fortunate. Um, but the thing that worries me about this narrative is, I don't know if you remember, but a month or so back, or a couple months or so, the CDC director in the United States, Rochelle Walensky, came under fire for a certain quote that she made in the media. And what she said was um, something like, the people that are dying are the ones that had four more comorbidities. And this part is the direct quote. So really, these are people who are unwell to begin with. It was said that she was taken out of context because she was quoting a study that was relating to vaccine effectiveness. And that study showed that most people who are fully vaccinated were not going to get severe disease and death. But if you look at the CDC's actual list of comorbidities, it is very easy to get to four comorbidities. So a comorbidity could be a thing like high blood pressure, having ever smoked, diabetes, asthma. It's not just serious things or more serious things such as having received an organ transplant. It's very easy to get into one of those groups. These are not all severely ill people who are on their deathbeds. And I worry that a lot of the framing around the Omicron is mild narrative contributes to that perception, which is inaccurate.
I want to talk about another sort of problematic phrase that you brought up in your op-ed, which was protect the vulnerable, which was sort of this phrase that was brought up quite early in the pandemic as a way to get people involved in getting their vaccines and such. What's wrong with that?
So protect the vulnerable has always been an interesting phrase. It's been used a lot in different disability-related discourses before the pandemic. What it does and what it has done here is it renders the vulnerable as a group of people who are outside society. And we saw that evolution throughout the pandemic. So in the beginning of the pandemic, the framing was we need to protect the vulnerable by social distancing, by isolating, by doing all of these things. Um, the vulnerable were not part of we. As the pandemic moved along, you got more and more messages such as, we need to protect the vulnerable so that the rest of us can get on with our lives. And so that segregates the vulnerable from civic participation, from life. Now, as I say in my column, people still say we need to protect the vulnerable, but I haven't seen any policy objectives that will actually go ahead and do that. It seems to be more of a token phrasing that politicians use when they admit that they don't actually have any plan for doing so. And that is extremely disheartening and discouraging.
So you were talking about policy. I want to talk about what measures government or community can take to help those who are most affected by the elimination of vaccine passports and mask wearing.
Well, I would say, and I did say in this column, that the vaccine passports were a flawed tool. They did require 2 doses. In order to be effective at this point, you'd have to probably move to a 3-dose model, and there are good reasons not to do that. What they did do, though, is that they did provide disabled people, vulnerable people, anyone who might be frightened to go out, some sort of assurance that going out would be a little bit more safe. And with their end, people don't have that anymore. If mask mandates are dropped, that's going to be even worse. So as far as policy goes, I would say if you're going to say that vulnerable people need to protect ourselves, we need to be given the tools to do that. One way that I could see doing that is to provide N95 quality masks to people on social assistance who will not be able to afford these masks. An adult on the Ontario Disability Support Program receives $1,169 per month. They already cannot pay for regular costs such as food and rent. They're not going to be able to buy their own extremely expensive masks. We could have targeted testing programs where people who have disabilities could receive a certain number of rapid tests. If people can't go to grocery stores to get these tests, which I do think was a good program, they're not going to benefit anyone. So we really need to get the protections to the people that need them.
Now, Sarah, you live close to the trucker occupation in Ottawa, which is in its 3rd week. How has that affected your life lately?
I'm lucky in that I'm a little bit isolated from Centertown, like where the vast majority of the trucker protests have happened. I have heard a little bit of the noise. The way that it's affected my life mostly is seeing the fear in those who work with me, such as personal care attendants, when they want to come in and help me with my care, for example. So one time a person didn't want to come in for their shift because she said that a friend of hers had been threatened for wearing a mask. People don't feel that it's safe to take the bus. So a lot of people are not receiving the services that they need right now, or they're not receiving them in a timely manner.
Sarah, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the program tonight. Of course, your article can be read on tvo.org. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.